Hello everyone, my name is Sarita Quafo and I'm a Knowledge Broker at the Mental Health Commission of Canada. I just want to go over, I'll welcome you to our first webinar for the Knowledge Exchange Collaborative. I just want to go over a couple of house rules. So please remember that the audio for this webinar is provided in broadcast mode through your computer speakers. You can hear us, but we can't hear you. If you're having any troubles, please check the audio settings on your computer or contact Adobe on the phone number on the slide. Also note that this webinar is being recorded and will be available on the MHCC website and other platforms at a later date. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to type them in the Q&A chat box on the bottom right of your screen. Note that we will hold most of the questions until the end of the presentation. You can also download the slide deck right now by selecting the document on the top right of your screen and click Download Files. So again, it's my pleasure to welcome you to the Knowledge Collaborative's first webinar on stakeholder engagement. Before we get started, I want to introduce to you myself, Sarita Quafo, and my colleague from the Canadian Centre on Substance Use and Addiction, Zachary Patterson. Together, we will briefly introduce to you what is the Knowledge Exchange Collaborative.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Sarita, for the introduction, and thank you for everyone for tuning in to the webinar. So perhaps before I start talking about the Knowledge Exchange Collaborative, I will back up one step and just sort of introduce the idea or the concept of concurrent disorders. So when we say concurrent disorders, we're talking about mental health issues and substance use issues co-occurring in the same individual at the same time. And this is probably a lot more common than you might expect. Somewhere in the neighborhood of 3 million Canadians at any given time report symptoms of concurrent disorders. So again, having a mental health issue and a substance use issue at the same time. So we know there's a lot of links between mental health and substance use. These links are very complex. There's a lot of factors that the mental health field and the substance use field can focus on that will impact both mental health issues and substance use or addiction issues. And I think that is really sort of the foundation of what we're doing here. It's about finding opportunities for the mental health side and the substance use and addiction side to work together to address the co-occurrence of mental health and addictions issues. And so I think at the end of the day, we are trying to improve the lives of individuals living with mental health issues and with substance use issues. And so I think it's really sort of important to sort of set that landscape or that background to what we're doing. So let's fast forward now and we'll talk about the Knowledge Exchange Collaborative. The idea here is we're trying to improve the mental health and substance use systems and service delivery through knowledge exchange. So again, we're trying to improve the lives of individuals living with mental health and or substance use issues, and knowledge exchange is a small piece to that much larger, much more complex puzzle. And so there is an opportunity here for the Mental Health Commission of Canada and the Canadian Centre on Substance Use and Addiction, as well as the mental health and addictions fields at large, to come together, build some capacity in knowledge exchange, and help move evidence or knowledge into programs, practice, and policy in a much more effective and efficient way. And if we can do that, if we can work together to move that knowledge into practice, again, at the end of the day, we can improve the lives of those living with mental health or addictions issues. So our vision here, I've already sort of stated that, is to contribute to improved mental health and substance use systems and service delivery through knowledge exchange. The idea is to increase collaboration on the knowledge exchange piece within individuals and organizations working in mental health and substance use and addictions field. And so part of this initiative is to host a series of webinars to build capacity among individuals in knowledge exchange in mental health and substance use sectors. So this is the first of a series of webinars that we will be hosting. As you already know, this topic today is on stakeholder engagement, which is an extremely important part of bringing knowledge into practice. We will be hosting these webinars on a quarterly basis moving forward, and the topics and content of those webinars in the future will be determined by the field. So right now we are engaged in a needs assessment where we are going out and asking our stakeholders, I guess in the name of stakeholder engagement, what are your needs? Where are the knowledge gaps? What tools and resources do you need to effectively engage in knowledge exchange, to effectively move that knowledge into practice? And so we will be in the topics of the future webinars will be informed by that needs assessment. So without further ado, I will pass it back to Sarita to introduce the speakers. Again, I just want to thank everyone for tuning in, and hopefully you learned something about stakeholder engagement.
Thank you very much, Zach. So before I introduce the speakers, I do have a quick polling question. So please indicate your level of agreement on the following statement. Stakeholder engagement is an important part of my work. So the poll should now be open for voting, and I'll just give you a couple of minutes to enter your vote. So I'm going to end the poll. Thank you very much for your vote. So as you can see, all of us would agree, either strongly or just agree, that stakeholder engagement is an important part of our work. So thank you very much. And moving on to, we have another poll before we get to our speakers. And this time we are asking you to please indicate your level of agreement with the following statement. I feel confident that I am, or my organization is, engaging with people with lived experience, including youth, meaningfully. So I'll give you a couple more minutes. Going to cut it off now. So again, thank you very much for your votes, and you can see sort of how it has how your responses have sort of fallen out. So a third of you would agree that you feel confident that you or your organization are engaging people with lived experience meaningfully. A third of you would agree, and a third of you would disagree. So I hope that even if you strongly agree and that you have the confidence that this webinar will be able to provide you with some information that will help you with engaging stakeholders. So I am pleased to introduce our speakers. The first speaker is Ohenia Canis. She's a coordinator at the Center for Research on Health Equity and Social Inclusion. She is also a health information science PhD candidate, where she uses critical, participatory, and arts-based research approaches to understand the impact of youth stakeholder input on the design and delivery of mental health services. Ohenia has clinical experience as an art therapist in child-adolescent oncology, working in hospital and community settings. For 5 years, she's coordinated a community of practice facilitating the generation and exchange of knowledge among 300 plus mental health professionals and the youth they served. The second presenter we have is Laurence Caron, who is a project manager for Quebec's provincial group on stigma, called Association Québécoise pour la Réadaptation Psychosocial, or AQRP. Laurent only recently began publicly disclosing his personal experiences with mental health problems, recovery, and with healthcare services after hearing an inspiring sentence that said, "If only those in crisis disclose against their will and those who get better stop talking about it. We give the world a false message on what it is to be human, to have difficulties, on the hope to overcome it and have a full and meaningful life." He's trained as a social worker, and now he uses his lived experiences to enrich his work as a professional carer and through knowledge transferring activities throughout Quebec and Canada. He is also a member of the Mental Health Commission of Canada's Hallway Group. And our third and final speaker will be Liz Wigfall. She is the manager of Knowledge Exchange Centre at the Mental Health Commission of Canada. Liz heads up the SPARK training program and leads a team of knowledge brokers who work on a variety of projects, including those related to stigma, diversity and equity, child and youth mental health and recovery. Previously, she worked as a learning and evaluation specialist at the Montfort Hospital, Ottawa's Francophone Hospital, as well as at Accreditation Canada, designing and facilitating workshops for Indigenous community health centers and treatment centers. So without further ado, I am going to pass it over to Ohenia.
Hello, everyone. I hope I'm heard sufficiently well. It's a pleasure to talk with you today. As Sarita was saying, I am coming at you from work in the community and later as researcher in youth engagement, and I hope to bring that perspective. I'm also really interested in what interests you about engagement and what brings you to this kind of webinar. So our time together today is going to be focusing on what youth engagement means when it shapes service design and care. So what I call the work of genuine engagement. I hope to share with you some impacts, some resources about work that's going on in Canada, and also to provoke some thinking and self-reflection as you go away in the coming days. And the question that seems to drive my work and that I like the most is simply, how do we honor a commitment to youth engagement? How do we really live to the values that youth engagement is about? So I think I'm very happy to share that we've seen such change in this area in the past 6 years at least. I was reflecting back, preparing for this webinar, and I thought to my first commission conference. That was in 2012. That was Together Against Stigma. And I remember giving a presentation for Mind Your Mind at the time. I remember the excitement in the room when talking about why engagement mattered. And indeed, this has been long in coming. This is a change in culture that strives to bring the perspectives of persons with lived experience. And it's really the result of challenging the dominant model of care, but also the result of the tireless work of patients, carers, supporters, the nothing about us without us sentiment from the recovery movement and disability rights, and as well as, more recently, neurodiversity advocates and MAD studies. So I think that this is very much about values-driven work. It's about human rights and social justice and equity. And I think that youth engagement in particular brings an additional dimension, which is the recognition that youth are a very diverse population. We all suffer when we paint all youth with the same brush, and we know that care that is one single solution doesn't address the very diverse needs of what is a completely multifaceted group, changing all the time, and also being youth in a very different type of world every single time. So youth engagement is that recognition that we need their lens, we need their contextualized knowledge of strengths and challenges and factors like social determinants of health, and as you were mentioning earlier, Zach, the co-occurrences in affecting their illness and their well-being. And that's a perspective we need in order to create services that work. So this is about trying to address that exclusion and bring their perspectives to the table. And there are many, many words and quite a lot of disciplines that have been addressing engagement, and that's where you see that range of participation, and you might see that it goes from involvement to voice to partnership to co-authorship. And increasingly I'm interested in something even more idealistic, which is that notion of mutuality and mutual growth. And so I guess one question that I have for you to support your reflection after this webinar would be to think about where you or your organization stands in terms of that readiness to engage, either youth or other persons with lived experience. And think about those words and which one of those words applies most realistically and most feasibly to you and your context. I also want to challenge you to really simplify the definition of youth engagement in a way that works for what you can do. Because rather than trying to achieve something very lofty and then falling short, what if we focus exactly on what it is that matters and work towards it? So from my own disciplinary lens, from a health information perspective, I'm interested in youth's knowledge transforming any given context. And I consider engagement to be the uptake of youth's knowledge to transform that context. And I'd love to know, in terms of feedback later, whether that kind of definition can resonate with you and the work that you do. It's certainly a knowledge translation kind of definition as well. So moving on, in terms of research and scholarship, what we know about youth engagement now has really changed. So I was talking about that conference in 2012, and now I flash forward to the most recent event that I attended this fall, the International Association of Youth Mental Health. And so much change is visible, even in the number of young people, the number of youth councils that were present and active, and the kind of strengthening numbers, but also the decision-making power that the Youth Council for the association had. They pretty much set the agenda of the conference. And the conversation was not about why, the conversation was about how. People wanted to know how to do youth engagement effectively, sustainably, meaningfully, and this bears out in the literature, in the research. We need operational knowledge of how to make engagement work in context, how to keep it sustainable. We also need evaluation of impacts and outcomes that are well beyond individual, but that are focused on the organization and the system. And we need to understand what are the barriers to engagement in the context of care or within the organizations themselves. Because often there's a tendency to put the responsibility for failed engagement on either the youth or the adults, saying, oh, they just didn't want to engage, when the reality is that maybe skill sets and resource allocation is missing. It's more about training and education, and it's also about acknowledging what is feasible and what are the barriers at play. So having said that, I want to share a little bit of the activities that are going on in Canada that I'm involved with. And I should just note right now, this is a tip of the iceberg. I really invite you to go to these activities, initiatives themselves, and learn more about them if you're interested. I think that excellent work is going on in Canada in terms of making youth engagement genuine, and one of these that I'm particularly happy to talk about is the Access Open Minds initiative going on across the country. This is a research project that's founded by CIHR and the Graham Beck Foundation. It has held youth engagement at the core of its value system. The slide that you're seeing right now was a conversation we had about the youth advisory councils in Access Open Minds, and so that group of investigators there is a very small group that I got to work with relating this particular topic. but the Access Open Minds Initiative is a systems transformation research project that is very complex and has multiple elements. One of its core elements is youth and family engagement. And to that end, they installed a Youth Advisory Council from the beginning, Family and Carers Council from the beginning at the national level. And somehow the photo is not coming up. But if you could see it, you would see a diverse group of youth from all over the country at the table, shaping the direction of the research, shaping how to articulate outcomes, and also keeping very close connection with their own context. So everyone in the National Council comes from one of the research sites across the country. It's unfortunate that the image didn't come through. My particular area of focus, oh, there it is. Sorry about that, guys. So that's the National Youth Council, and members of it come from specific research sites across the country. So my particular focus is at the Chatham-Kent site here in Ontario. And what you see there is the Youth Council and the Family Carers Council working together. They do this all the time. What we've been investigating there has been the nature and impact of this youth council at the local level. And this is very much in relation to the organizational culture and the culture of care in Chatham-Kent. So I think one of the main areas that I stress in that research and is playing out really well with this group is this notion of youth engagement as work. So it is work for the coordinators, for all the advocates within the organization, and also for the youth themselves. Youth engagement requires specific skills and intensive resources and really a constant negotiation of trying to bring what young people know at the table and somehow have it align and work and shape what care and what services look like. I think also that once you frame youth engagement as work, it's easier to see some of the skills and resources needed for it, but it's also easier to see how it relates or clashes with the organizational culture, why it's difficult sometimes to make it work, to keep people engaged, and to see it trickle up into larger shifts and change. So in reflecting with the coordinator of the Youth Advisory Council in Chatham and also with the national coordinator, we came around to articulating some key dimensions of engagement work, and I wanted to see how these resonate perhaps with the organizations that you belong to or the experiences you have had. So key dimensions of this type of work include flexibility, the ability to chart unknown territories, the commitment to being self-reflexive, which means that you're both aware and accepting of inherent tensions, sometimes between youth and adults, sometimes between different professions within the organization. Another key dimension is the ability to normalize that uncomfortable feeling that things are taking shape organically. And I love that quote. That quote comes from the National Project, and I think I can relate to how there are large organizations and projects in Canada that, you know, they're not incentivized to behave organically. No one is trained to operate organically and just see what happens. So already there's a tension between what youth engagement needs in order to be genuine and how things can actually operate sometimes within larger organizations. Equally, there's the valuing of co-creation and improvisation, revision, going with the flow. And again, for your self-reflection, I invite you to consider how much can you go with the flow in the specific circumstances of your work, and how to make it work. How is it possible to then hold both opposites, right? The need to involve young people by being by improvising and being iterative and being organic, and yet also function within the structures that hold your organization. And that's really what it means to commit to participatory values and to live the values and to put them to action. So for that, you need some strategies. You very much need active champions within the organization. You need to develop and nurture mutual trust and keep resourcing knowledge exchange between any adults in the organization and any stakeholders, particularly young people. And you need a lot of transparency, clarity of boundaries and expectations, and this is all in itself a knowledge translation challenge, right? That sustain meaningful communication. So that's a little bit about access. I think I didn't disclose earlier, and I should, that part of my doctoral work is funded by Access. I'm recipient of their doctoral fellowship, and so that's partly why my work is focused on them. And this is a good thing. Another good thing is what other organizations in the country are doing regarding evaluation of youth engagement and the necessity to look inward. And I'll talk about this picture if I get a moment later, but first I want to tell you about the Wisdom to Action Network. Wisdom to Action is formerly known as the Children and Youth in Challenging Contexts Network. So many of you may know CYCC. They started in 2011, so they've been around for a few years. And right away from the beginning, they involved young people in the co-authorship and design of a lot of their vehicles and their knowledge mobilization. So I'm going to speak a little bit about a presentation that we did with Wisdom to Action Leadership and Youth Council. This was 2 months ago, and we were talking about what kind of processes are necessary to move the wisdom of youth's lived experience to design community-based programming. Essentially, the network is constantly asking itself what knowledge translation can do to ensure that young people's voices are integrated in meaningful ways. And through asking themselves that question, they came to realize that the youth engagement work that they do themselves, well, it was time to evaluate it. It was time to ask, how are we doing, and what does genuine engagement mean in this context? So, as a result of that, we participated in, or rather we developed a participatory evaluation of youth engagement in the network, and this involved not only the members of the Youth Council, but also staff of the network and advisory board members. So at the level of operations and the level of governance, how are all of these people, this community, living out the values of engaging youth? And I was very lucky to be an evaluator in this process, but I consider that an odd word because it was really a group reflection, and my role was really to just catch and synthesize and translate the knowledge held by that group. And the question I have for you in terms of your own self-reflection is, if you already are involved in youth engagement, how ready do you feel to self-reflect and evaluate the quality of engagement in your process? So what Wisdom to Action did, what we all did together, was we created a theory of change, and this ends up looking a lot more like a logic model in terms of some of the inputs, activities, outputs, but the basic premise is that genuine engagement leads to effective activities in the network, and that allows them to fulfill their mission, which is to strengthen the youth service sector to ultimately improve youth well-being. So if you have a moment afterwards you want to reflect, if you ever want to touch base about the details of this model, by all means reach out to myself or to Wisdom to Action Network. The findings through this engagement evaluation are really that the benefits are mutual, And I'll just skip through these quotes, which are emphasizing and expanding on what that mutuality feels like, because I want to make sure I get to the next slide within time. And this is the conclusion, that youth engagement for this organization is a core component. So harks back to the access model, to where when youth engagement becomes a core component of the mandates, then it's interconnected with its mission, and it's completely connected with its plans for sustainability. And so that has been an important finding for the Wisdom to Action Network. I think that I love what the young people said in terms of their own engagement. Nothing ever has to be perfect to still fill you with hope. And this young person said, you know, there's room to learn, to strengthen relationships, to make mistakes, and to learn from them too. So part of being active in this council for this young person was very much about learning and being a strong member of the youth serving sector. And I think that they were very open to the conversations necessary to exchange what's worked and what can be better all the time. So I'm mindful of my time, and I want to get to the last three messages I want to leave with you. Whether you're undertaking youth engagement now or in the future, I really encourage you to draw on existing lessons in our national community. I think that the Commission, for example, Access Open Minds, Wisdom to Action, many researchers in Canada are disseminating, they're sharing important findings, important lessons. Keep in mind that research on youth engagement is 99% of the time qualitative explorations that hold the same participatory values. So you're going to be getting the lived experience and the stories of young people in the country. And there's no need to reinvent the wheel. There's a huge need to listen to the youth in your context, but that does not mean that you go out and you recruit a whole new council when there's already a youth council in your community. Instead, invest your time and resources in really listening to the youth that have already engaged and find ways to make sure that those voices are diverse. And then the last thing I want to say is that this business of living up to the values of youth engagement requires us to acknowledge that there will always be power differentials. And you know, it's not easy to recognize the privilege we have, but if we have jobs that are not precarious, if we're already equipped with the skills to hold a meeting or to draw up an agenda, then automatically we're in a position of power relative to the young people in the room. And so acknowledge that power and remember that the voices that we need at the table the most are the voices that have not been heard. So that's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Eugenia, for your presentation. It was very enlightening, and I have learned one or two at least about youth engagement. Moving on to the next presentation, I would like to ask Laurent to unmute himself and take us through engaging people with living or having lived with mental health problems.
So hi everyone. So yes, I'm Laurent Scarron, talking about stakeholders. So stakeholders may influence services and society, but different stakeholders will have historically at least different status and credibility and power in organization. So today I'm going to mainly talk about engaging people living or having lived with mental health problems. Yeah, so be careful today, as you might have noticed, French-speaking people on board, so you might have to work a bit to understand what I'm trying to say. Yeah, but feel free to ask questions in the Q&A box, and I'll explain the meaning of my words if needed. So yes, this is my face. Just want to know you to know, even though Sarita told you, I'm project manager and knowledge broker at AQRP, and I'm also a member of the Alway Group. The Alway Group is composed of people with lived experience, with people living or having lived with mental health problems. Today I'm going to switch back and forth between these two hats. Yeah, I'm going a bit fast because I have a lot to say. It's a big topic. This is a QRP. I won't be telling much about that, but we're working mostly in French, and most of our programs can be also, they can be dealt in English also. So peer specialist program on stigma also with youth, voice hearing network, etc. So the structure of the presentation, I'm going to talk about the vocabulary, what we mean by those, area where experiential knowledge is used or can be used, how to foster engagement, and my path of engagement if we have time. So vocabulary. Wow, okay. Who are those we call user? Sorry for that slide. I don't know where it came from. Who are those we call user, consumer, consumer survivor? Who am I talking about today? Let's say, to be more clear, that there's a wide range, a big diversity of people who can call themselves users, survivors, people with lived experience. And the common conclusion would be that it's whoever identifies as such. So there can be people who have been diagnosed with mental illnesses or substance abuse problems. It could be people with paid jobs, people without paid jobs, astronauts, prime ministers, bus drivers, psychiatrists. So a lot of a big diversity of people that can come there. And about the words we can use, I'd say that there's no word in all of my experience. I've been recovering for more than 15, 16 years and working in the mental health sector since maybe 7 years and across the province-wide for maybe 4 or 5 years. I've never seen any word that would fit for everybody. So I know that no words are neutral, but some might be better than others. But I'd suggest that if you have to maybe define what you mean behind the word you use in your organization, and maybe even open discussion with the targeted people, because yeah, some will be offended by some words and some won't. So it's some kind of an administrative problem, but at the same time it can affect the people that you work with. I'll also say about the people I'm aiming at with user, consumer, etc., that it's not about defining the people, but acknowledging that it's part of the person's life. And if we talk of engaging this type of people, we talk about engaging that part of the person's life. So, for instance, on many boards, you have professionals who are going to talk as professionals, but they'll take the chair of people with lived experience because they have had that type of experience. But while they're on the board, they won't share those experiences. So you can ask yourself, is it really a person with lived experience that's on the board? So that's a question you might ask yourself. It's about acknowledging that part of his life, and that part of his life is not without value, not without meaning. So we want to talk to that part of the life. By engaging or participation, well, it depends who asks. Usually, Healthcare managers have their perspective, users have their own, direct service providers have some also. If you take, for instance, the healthcare managers, often they'll use engaging to fulfill their best practices that they are imposed by the political, which was imposed a bit by people with lived experience many years ago, for the recovery movements, for instance. They also do it to improve services, accessibility, quality, cost. So in that particular perspective, you are more or less in the same logic than big brands who want to collect information from consumers. So you might ask, you can, for instance, have a survey with consumers. Will those people will feel that it's a meaningful engagement? It's not for me to answer. For myself, I wouldn't feel really engaged. Yeah, and often for the healthcare managers, it's based on the idea that all policy development and program delivery should start by listening to consumers. I have some examples here. You could read them eventually since you have the PowerPoint. There's also field service providers' perspective to engage people. Often those people will use engagement to empower people on the philosophy of full citizenship. So, you know, somebody could start with helping with the dishes on a day center and then help organize an activity and then being on the board and then have some responsibilities on the board. And then he can bring those new acquired skills to other areas of his life, for instance, a job or something like that. So engaging can be something where we want to help people take power on his life or something like that. It's not bad. It's another way of motivation, yeah, for engaging. And there's the user's perspective, so the famous nothing about us without us. Yeah, on that note, I'll have a request. If those from the MHCC, Liz and Sarita, if you could just leave the webinar for a couple minutes. I have a story to tell about those girls, and I want, like, I know that they maybe feel they could interfere with my story, so I just want you girls to, if you could leave just a minute. And I know for a fact that statistically women could be more emotional and not sure that they can take it, so please. So I was just kidding, but it's all about the malaise, if I may say, that people talking without us being here, talking about us making decisions. So I just wanted to make a small example. Don't know if it worked, but still. It was not about you girls. Just wanted to make an example. So the famous nothing hood. Well, yeah, I don't know what's hood example, but I'll ask later. So I have some examples from the hallway group. Cool. The hallway group, as I said, is people with lived experience who are an advisory, some kind of advisory committee for the MHCC. So here are their answers. The mental health system should make sense to those that it should make sense the most. People with lived experience. So that's a good motivation to engage people. It's from Chris Somerville from Manitoba. Here is also Debbie, who wrote a document on engaging people with lived experience. You have the title there. She says, engagement to me means starting from the beginning to have people involved, not halfway or near the end for rubber stamping. Sure, it takes more time, but haste make waste. So you see that often people are engaged at the end for rubber stamping. So as Debbie said, it's a huge topic, and she mentions many things that are done in our part of the world. You could read it afterwards, and she's quite positive, even though she says it doesn't happen as often as they would like. But some good things are happening in our part of the world in engaging. It's just because I have a lot to say, so I'll go forward. Eugène says, I would recommend using the term full citizenship and remembering the name of the newsletter of the RASM. It's something in Quebec for the alternative point of views in mental health. So the newsletter is called L'autre espace, the other space. According to Eugène, this is what is required, a new space. Because often, people kind of get doubtful that what we have already in our system can bring people around the table as equals. So he said, I liked what he said about Noam Chomsky. It reminded him that the smart way to keep people passive and obedient is to strictly limit the spectrum of acceptable opinion, but allow very lively debate within that spectrum. Even encourage the more critical and dissident views. That gives people the sense that there's free thinking going on, while all the time the presumptions of the system are being reinforced by the limit put on the range of the debate. So I like what he says, because it's some kind of blurred limit that we can put, like, yes, we ask the question, but within some kind of a box, and you cannot go out that box. So is your opinion really important in that way? So he was from New Brunswick. Nigel Bart says consumer involvement should start from the beginning also, to avoid baked cake situation where people get to give their opinion on already built project. It could be research, it could be policies, etc. There are big cons on to limit the participation of people with lived experience. Some may say it's slower. There's no really plus value to it, because you can have a research asking questions on to thousands of people. So why would I have 5 people with lived experience on my advisory committee, right? They don't represent everybody. So you can see that. Maybe slower. Some people may get in crisis, act out. Well, you can ask if it's the right person at the right place, but we hear those things. And I may say, from my point of view, that there's also a limit where, there's always all the users that haven't been touched still by the programs we have. So you can say, are the actual or past user, can they represent the future users? So it's a question that you can ask. I'd like to, 5 minutes. Can you tell me the time again, please? So where and how experiential knowledge can be used, because remember, it's not about that it defines you, but can you use it in different areas depending on what areas you touch in your work or in your life. Okay. So in the work that Debbie did, they said that it could be used in individual care. So for instance, my own care, I think it starts there. It can be used in program and service design, and it could be used in system and community. So you could read that one afterwards. It's in both, so inform, consult, involve, collaborate, empower. Okay. In individual care, well, it's through recovery, self-help, dreams, strength. So I think it starts here. Do you believe you're worth something? Am I around the table with the health professional as an expert of my life? Am I allowed to make choices, to have dreams, etc.? So the needs for it is recognizing experiential expertise. Am I the expert of my life? Believing in recovery. You can't fake believing in recovery. Recovery for me and many others is the result of having positive experiences with people that are recovering. Okay? So hope comes from there. There's also the need for shared risk management. Often people or professionals or even us might say, oh no, I might go back using, or he might go back using, or he might go back in psychosis. So we're going to limit the risks. And if we do that, well, you limit the potential of recovery, of learning. So is the professional able to take that risk, or is it a shared risk management? There's something that we could talk about in another webinar. The possibility to make choices. Am I involved in my own recovery? Can I make choices, or can I just follow one and only path? Yeah. You can involve people in the program and services design. 1 minute, thanks. So through all the ways you can imagine to include people in either planning, delivering, evaluation, advisory group, consultation, focus group, you name it, you can read it. So there are many ways, and there's also, this comes from Debbie's document, Chris's document also, but I had it after the L1, being in an association or organization representing users' interest, co-attending to staff training, can be that, activities in mixity with staff, fundraising, choir, so being with the staff, not just as a client, recruit staff, helping recruit staff. There are many ways where people with lived experience can be included. But still, you might need resources, you might need training and information. Often people don't come from the health sector, for instance, or so they need, or research sector, so they need some training, some information. Otherwise, you'll feel that they're just like a big weight that you have to pull. Is the right person at the right place? Not everybody's good in everything. So you can think about an inclusion protocol for all, not just for people with lived experience, but how do you include people in the team? And to have feedback and public information on what people do. Because, you know, you can have people here. There are many great programs who include people with lived experience, but since we don't know about it, it's like a falling tree in the forest without any witness. So maybe you do that for the person, maybe you do that for the services. It's a lot of work just for that. If you want to make people believe that we are part of everything, there's have to be some kind of public information on what where people are involved and what they change. In this system and community, you know, you can have people in research, in trainings. For instance, I do some trainings with people as a knowledge broker. I use scientific information, field information, and my experiential information also. Can have contact strategy to fight stigma. It was the first time for myself that I really went out in the community and felt that, hey, you know, it's okay to be me. And to be part of. So it's a way of doing that. being in an association to do advocacy. You can do Recovery College, many other things. Yeah. I'm almost finished. I'll take the minute also. I liked what Chris Somerville wrote to me. I'm just gonna read it to you. Engagement is any process that involves the interests of the people with lived experience to identify and set priorities and direction. So you see, it's more in talking about the design of programs. Contribute to or make decisions, influence, change, assess, and evaluate programs, policies, and services. It's a two-way. Engagement is two-way, involves the transparent exchange of information, seeks common understanding and common ground, and leads to trust-based, sustainable relationships. I like what Eugenia said about it was values-driven work. I liked it a lot. So participation, making a difference, respect, understanding one's right. It's moved the experience from service users from exclusion to inclusion. Okay. Because historically it was more of you're a patient and you're gonna stay there because there was some kind of paternalistic way of dealing with the patients. So we try to switch that back. To foster engagement, there are many questions here. I know that people maybe freak out at the MHCC right now. Just gonna finish my last minute. So about the freaking out, I meant impatient. Sorry, I was looking for my word. So there's always the money questions. Will people get money for their participation, or will only those without lived experience get money, and those on the board will have like a grilled cheese? So is there money for the people there? Are their knowledge and preparation been recognized? So there's that. There's the militant and angry person question. Many people have been disappointed by the services they had for the way they've been treated. And now that it's changing, people say, you know what, it's the past. But I would suggest that often many people still have to be heard. Can not just say, you know what, it's the past and sorry for that. Some people are angry for, I don't know, since 50 years. So still some people have to get heard. It's not everybody, but still it might be also a way to feel engaged, just to be able to say all the story. The slowing us down question, again, it all depends on the values, what are you aiming for, and is the person trained, and is the right person at the right time. Same thing for the capacity, the purpose of one's life. There are many different people. Some have different goals, so there's not only one place that people should be engaged in. You have to multiply the places where they can be heard. The representativeness, it's important there. In many researches or even in committees, often the stakeholders are chosen, and you can ask yourself, who are they representative of? So I'm a big I advocate a lot for a national-wide association of people with lived experience that could include all points of view. But you can also ask, who are we representing if there's no association? Who are the people in the researches representing if they are chosen? At the same point, you can ask the alternative point of views. Are they included, or since people are often chosen, will those points of views be out of the question? The tokenism, we all heard about it. Yeah, and it's the final question. There's many others, but for me, are you doing this for the personal recovery of the people or for the collective utility? You have to ask yourself that, because in some ways you can include people for their personal recovery, but at some point there's some kind of paternalism to think that every people need that. There's also the need to have a more human society and services that drives people to do that. So yes, thanks everybody. I've gone beyond my time. I'll be. I won't talk about my path, but eventually we'll get to know each other. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Laurent, for your presentation. It was very interesting to learn more about how to engage people with lived and having lived experience. I know we are over time, but if you can join and continue and stay with us, that would be great. Otherwise, this will be recorded and will be available on MACC's website and other platforms at a later date. Now, I would like to introduce Liz.
Hi, everybody, and I'd just like to say thank you very much to Eugenia and Laurence for those really great presentations. I certainly learned a lot from listening to you, and certainly learned that I need to make some adjustments in my own stakeholder engagement. A couple of things I pulled out for myself was that youth engagement is beneficial for everyone, not just for the youth. And I think often we think, oh yes, we have to engage people, but it actually does truly benefit us to do that. And another piece that I pulled out was that people with lived experience do come from all walks of life. They are sometimes our mental health professionals, they're policymakers, and you know, they're even here at the Commission and at CCSA, so it's great to have those people working together with us, and as Laurent said, having the right people in the right place has really helped us on our journey. So up on the screen you'll see there's the front page of the Innovation to Implementation Guide, which is what the SPARK training program is based on. And I know several of you on the call are Sparkies and have gone through the program. So I just wanted to connect it to the eye-to-eye. So if you look, just to connect on the types of knowledge that we see as being important, and I think just by having this particular type of webinar, we've indicated that it's not just about research and the scientific knowledge, but it's also about experiential knowledge, so the experience of people with lived experience and how important that is. I really loved Chris Somerville's quote about the system should be important to the people, it should be important to the most. People with lived experience, and to that we've also added pragmatic and cultural knowledge, which I guess we can talk about another time in another webinar. So just looking at the eye-to-eye 7-step guide here. So what we do is, and those of you who've been through the program know this, is we go through this as a way of creating our SPARK projects and planning KT plans for our projects. So after stating the purpose, we look at an innovation. You know, what is that? Is that a piece of research, or is it a particular way of looking at, say, using a suicide prevention checklist? Could it be a forum, that kind of thing, that we want people to use to make our system better. And the third and fourth steps in this process, the ones that are most closely related to what we've been talking about today. So in the third step, we always look at our actors and actions. So who are the people that we want to engage in our KT process, and what do we want them to do as a result of that engagement? So often now what we're finding in the SPARK program, as we're developing and changing over the years is that people are often doing that, identifying of stakeholders and actors before they decide on the innovation and bringing in their stakeholders to decide what is that innovation to help reach your purpose. And seeing that more and more, and I think that's really the way of the future as we become more grounded in genuine stakeholder engagement. The other piece here in step 4 is identifying agents of change. So Ahenia mentioned having champions, who can help move work forward. So there's a real connection to the work that we're promoting here, and so I'd just like to thank you both for making that connection. So we didn't even talk about the eye to eye in our prep for this, but it was great to see how those connections fit together. And I think that was it for me. So I think there's one more poll.
Yeah. So thank you very much, Liz, for sort of wrapping it all together very nicely. So the final poll is up, and let me just open it for you guys. So please indicate your level of agreement on the following statement. Now I have new knowledge to improve engagement with stakeholders with lived experience, including youth. So just give you a couple of minutes to cast your vote. And I'm going to cut it off. So as you can see, we're all sort of coming away with new information, new knowledge, which is great, which is sort of the goal of this. So I'm really glad that we are able to help you and give you new knowledge on how to better engage with stakeholders. And so now we're going to take a couple of questions. The first one, I think, is for Ahenia. How is youth engagement different from other stakeholder engagement?
Hello there, yes. So the question is, how is youth engagement different from other types of stakeholder engagement? One way to look at the difference is that point around the youth population being a very specific type of population, not only because they're very diverse and they identify in multiple locations, but because developmentally they are changing and their historical situation is always different. So another way to put that is to say that every single time you talk to a youth, that perspective is completely unique. Nobody else grew up with that makeup of a personality and situation in life at that particular time and has the particular strengths and challenges that they bring to the table. So, keeping in mind that they're also developing as individuals, so they may be transitioning into a workforce or trying to get into it or wrapping up education or trying to get into education. They may be very young and they may be parents at the same time. This is what I was talking about. It's very difficult to paint all the young people that come to your table with the same brush. And I think that adding possible lived experience or possible experience as caregivers makes that, engagement with that population very complex, and there's a lot of rich perspectives.
I think that you're very right with that in terms of the complexity of situations.
Yeah.
We have another question that's come in. Up to what age would you is considered youth?
So that's a lovely question. I always love to think about how being a young person is about being in transition. And so that really changes depending to the world that you live in. Access Open Minds has their catchment between 11 and 25. However, there are members of the council who are maybe 28, and they are still young people. They're still seeking economic independence. They're still seeking to belong to the labor force. They are very much in a state of transition. Just to give you an example of how that plays out at a global level, in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, the definition of youth ends at age 40. And that's because the economic conditions have made it impossible for people to find independence, financial independence from their family of origin until later in life. So I think how you define youth really has to depend on the needs of the youth themselves and what their life experience is like at a given time. And not so much go by a number, you know. A biological number doesn't tell you very much about what that person needs and on their strengths.
If I don't, hello, it's Laurence. If I'm not mistaken, the Youth Council of the MHCC also concluded, as you said, that it's people in state of transition, so there's no age attached to that committee. Yeah.
Good.
Great. Thank you both so much. So before I let you go, I just want to remind you that a satisfaction survey will be emailed to you after this webinar. If you can please complete it, that will definitely help us with our future webinar series. And on that note, this concludes the webinar. I would like to thank Eugenia and Laurence for their very insightful presentations, as well as Liz. Thank you very much, and thank you for all of you who have joined us today. Again, my apologies for going over, and thank you very much for sticking with us. So I guess the final, with it being the holiday season, we just want to wish you, everyone, a safe and happy holiday and Happy New Year. You may now disconnect.